to the Putting Your Business on the Map podcast. I'm your podcast host, Landon Blake, a land surveyor living and working in Central California. Happy to have you here. Let's go ahead and dive right into today's episode. This is part 2 of our episodes on qualifying leads and controlling your proposal costs. I was going to try and get that all in one episode, and I ended up talking too much. So we had to split that. I had to split that into 2. So, all right, what did we talk about? Let's just briefly review what we talked about in episode 1. I gave you that opening story about how the big engineering company I work for went after that on-call contract with the county road department, which was probably a foolish decision in hindsight. We talked about why this is important, why it's important to qualify leads and control proposal costs. We talked about some mistakes that I made early on in RH qualifying leads and proposals. There were 2 big mistakes that I made. And then we reviewed some factors that contribute to the cost of proposals. Now, there was 5 or 6 different elements of business development and proposal preparation. We talked about what those were, and all of those individual elements contribute to the cost of proposals. What are we going to talk about in part 2 here in this episode? We are going to talk about how you can reduce your proposal costs and make proposals more efficient. So there's a couple different ways you can kind of win this battle, right? One is you prepare fewer proposals for more qualified leads. So that's the first part. And then the second part is when you do prepare proposals, you try and make that as efficient as you can, as productive as you can without, cutting corners or decreasing the quality of your proposals. So we'll talk about what are some suggestions on how you can do that. I don't have 4 or 5 suggestions I'll share with you. Then we're going to take a break, and we'll talk about how do you demonstrate expertise to potential clients. So if you're not giving them free advice and you're not giving them free proposals all the time, what are the other ways you demonstrate expertise? Because that's still important in a professional consulting business. It's important to demonstrate your expertise to potential clients. I'll give you 4 different ways you can do that, 3 or 4 different ways. And then we're going to talk about how you can avoid the mistakes that I made when I started RH the first couple years, giving away too much free advice and preparing too many proposals. We'll talk about what are some things you can do to avoid making those mistakes. I've got 5 or 6 things we'll talk about. And then finally, we'll wrap up. We'll just talk a little bit about analytics. How can you track your proposal costs and understand if you're spending money on the right type of proposals for the right type of clients? We'll talk about some numbers you can track, some metrics you can look at, and some analytics, some analysis you can run. We don't do that. We track proposal time here, but it all goes into one bucket. We don't track it on an individual proposal basis or even an individual client basis. And I think as we grow as a company, I don't even know if we're gonna keep growing, but if we continue to grow, despite my best efforts to throttle that back a little bit, and more of our team members start preparing proposals, then we will need to look at doing some more of the analytics. And so we can talk a little bit about how you can do that. I've already said so like 5 times. I'm working on my word whiskers. Be patient with me, please. So is my favorite word in the entire universe. Yeah, I felt really bad about my word whiskers, and then I listened to one of my favorite podcasts, and I realized both the host and the guest had multiple word whiskers, and so then I felt slightly better. Not that is an excuse. And then I mentioned this in the first part, the first part of this topic, the previous episode, that I don't have this all figured out, and so I want to just say that right at the beginning. I'm still working to do better on this. I still spend too much time talking to the wrong potential clients and preparing proposals that have no chance of turning into a contract. I've gotten a lot better at it, but there's still room for me to improve, and so, so I don't want you guys to think that I have this all figured out, because I don't. All right. How do you reduce your proposal costs. So if you get to the point where you think you have a qualified lead and you know you need to prepare a proposal, and remember when I say proposal, it could also be a statement of qualifications. So I'm using that term to cover both of those things. If you decided you need to prepare a proposal or an SOQ for a qualified lead, how do you do that as inexpensively as you can and still preserve the quality of your business development? So I have 5 suggestions on how you can do that. The first one sounds easy, but is a little more difficult in practice, and that is develop good proposal templates. We've done a pretty good job of that here at RH. Our proposal templates could use a little work, but we have what we call scope task library. We have a scope of services template. We have a couple different fee estimate templates that we use, a simple one and a more complicated one. We have a cover letter template. We have a plain language agreement and a summary of our plain language agreement. We have a scheduled template if the project needs a detailed schedule. So our team has done a pretty good job of building a good template library that makes proposals much more efficient. Preparation of proposals much more efficient. It also makes your proposals more consistent, appear more consistent, which is really important, especially if you're working with the same clients over and over as we do. So that consistency is an important part of your branding, I think. Templates help with that. That's a big investment. Maybe I'll do a PYB OTM extra and talk a little bit about our proposal templates and how they're set up. It is a big investment, and it took me a long time. It took us a long time to develop those, and they need some work and they need some cleanup. I've got a new marketing person. I hope you guys will be able to meet her at some point. Her name is Miriam. I'm super excited to have her. She actually went to college. She's going to college for marketing. She's going to get her master's degree in business with a focus on marketing. I'm super happy to have her. So she will help me with that. I will tell you right now, while we have done a good job on our proposal templates, we have not done a good job on our statement of qualification templates. So resumes, company profile. We could do better. We have some of that stuff, but there's not a good templating system, and a lot of it needs to be updated. Hopefully that's something I can work with Miriam on. Part of that's just because we don't do a ton of SOQs. I don't want to get totally sidetracked on this, but I have learned to not submit SOQs to agencies if I don't have some kind of relationship with them already. If they don't know me or I don't know somebody in the agency, because I found it's just a waste of time. So a lot of companies, we would just throw SOQs out to agencies that had never even heard of us. And I've just found that not only are your chances at being selected not very good, if you do get selected, that's probably not the kind of client relationship you want. So we don't do as many SOQs as other companies that play in the same market that we play in. But we do, we do 2 a year, maybe 1 or 2 a year. And it's, like I said, we're almost always asked to submit. But that was my long-winded excuse for not having good SOQ templates. We need to improve that. That's the first way you can reduce your proposal costs, is by developing good templates. The second way, and you can't do this as much on the government side. You can't do this as much for government contracts, but I use it all the time in private practice, for private clients. And that is, I just use informal email proposals. So almost always before I go through the time and effort to prepare a formal proposal, the potential client gets an email proposal. It's almost always 1 page or less. It has a little mini scope of services and a ballpark fee estimate and a ballpark schedule and some standard boilerplate. I've been pretty successful with that. I find I can eliminate 90% of the tire kicking with an email proposal. I think by the time I've prepared a formal proposal, if I go beyond the email proposal and prepare a formal proposal, I don't know what our hit rate is at that point. It's high. It's way higher than it was when I started, and it's way higher than I've ever had seen it at any of my other employers. I think it's north of 75%. It might be north of 90%. What that means is 7 or 8 or 9 times out of 10, let's just call it 8. 8 times out of 10 or 4 times out of 5. If I've taken the time to prepare a formal proposal, we're getting a contract. That helps you reduce costs because it's expensive to prepare formal proposals, even with a good template system. So one way I avoid wasting time preparing formal proposals for tire kickers is I use informal email proposals to do a little bit of filtering there. It's part of that's kind of a late stage lead qualification step, right? Is sending an email proposal and seeing the reaction that we get. Okay, related item, and this doesn't have to be in an email proposal, but it's related because I almost always do this in the email proposals. I just give people ballpark prices to test for realistic expectations. Now you can't do that when you're new and you lack experience because you're going to give out bad ballpark prices. But I've been doing this a long time, and unless it's a really big and complicated project, most of the time if you call me and talk to me for 5 minutes, I can give you a really good feel, plus or minus $5,000 or $10,000. Of what your cost is going to be. Now I know people out there are saying plus or minus $5,000 or $10,000, but you got to remember most of our work is we rarely do anything under $20,000, and our typical project is somewhere between the $15,000 and $50,000 range. So if I can get folks within $5,000, I'm usually within I'm within 10% or 20% of the actual cost. And that's pretty good for just a ballpark kind of off the cuff estimate. So you can use ballpark estimates to test if your client has, that does two things. Number one, it tells you, is your client, do they have realistic expectations about what your services are going to cost and what the project is going to cost? And those are different. So when I give ballpark estimates, especially for land development, I always tell the client, here's what I think my services are going to cost you. And by the way, here's what I think it's going to cost you to get through the whole project. That's other consultant fees, government agency fees, and other costs that you're going to have, which is super helpful to the client. I don't go into detail on that because, again, you want to be careful about how much free advice and free consulting you give. But I will give, I can tell you people if they want to do, I'm just going to use an example. If you want to do a 2 or 3 parcel map anywhere in Central California, you should plan on $20,000 to $40,000 to get through that process. That's my fees, the title company fees. Maybe if you need a civil engineer for some stuff, that some of their fees and meeting some basic conditions of approval, pretty minor basic conditions of approval. And that's what it is. If you don't have, let's call it $40K, you probably shouldn't be doing a minor subdivision in my part of California. You should, period, full stop. So you can use ballpark prices. If somebody has a visceral reaction to that, if they have a heart attack when you give them that number, then you don't want to get under contract with them. They don't got enough money to do what they're trying to do. Use ballpark prices. Another tip that I have learned is I will charge for an initial consultation and preparation of a formal proposal. I don't do that all the time. I would say right now it's about 50-50. So about 50% of the time when I get a lead and I'm talking to a lead, if I feel like they might not have a sense of urgency or that they're price shopping, they've called 7 other surveyors, or they're a vampire looking to suck free value, free consulting out of me, I will just tell them, hey, here's a ballpark price. This is what I'm going to charge you to do some research and needs discovery with you and prepare a formal proposal. And that number's not huge. It's somewhere between $800 and $2,500, depending on what they want. You would be amazed at how effective that is at just weeding out a bunch of riffraff. Like, it is one of the best things we have ever done as a small business is start asking those people for a little bit of money. Because what that does is immediately eliminates the people that are calling 17 surveyors and looking for the guy that can be $200 cheaper. And we don't want to work for those people. We will never be that firm. We will never be that team. We will never be that surveyor. And so we just eliminate those people by asking for a very small fee to cover the cost of our initial consultation. That's if the client wants to move. If I give them a ballpark and they want to move forward with a formal proposal, but I still think they're maybe not being completely honest with me, or I'm not sure they really know what they're getting into, I will ask them to pay us for a proposal. And I have had potential clients do that. It doesn't happen all the time, but I don't know, a few times a year. half a dozen times a year, RH gets paid to put together a little proposal. So you can do that. The other thing, and I talked about this briefly, is we try and push the preparation of a formal proposal to as close to contract execution as we can possibly get it. In other words, I don't like to prepare a formal proposal until I've got a client ready to sign a contract and pay a deposit. Now, it can get a little tricky because especially when you're dealing with other professionals like civil engineers or architects, they are just accustomed to getting a full formal proposal from 8 different people before they get under contract. And so you might get a little pushback on that. But that's where that informal email proposal comes in. And I just have to tell potential clients, like, look, if you're serious, if you're not just looking for a date, if you want to get married, if you're serious about getting me into a contractual relationship, which is what a marriage is, like, I'll prepare a proposal, but I got to know you're serious. Like, they got to buy an engagement ring. I haven't yet perfected that. And I talked to you guys a little bit about that Alta survey I did a couple months ago. The Alta survey proposal I did that was a complete waste of time. So I still get burned a little bit, but I'm getting better at it. And, I basically tell the client, like, look, here's our standard agreement, because we have that. It's basically ready to go. I'll send them the template. Here's our standard agreement, in case you want to look at our contract language. Here's a ballpark estimate. Here's a mini scope in an email. Let me know when you're ready to come down here and pay the deposit or send a wire for the deposit and sign that agreement. And when you're ready to do that, I will prepare a formal proposal, cover letter, scope, tailored agreement, and a schedule, potentially. Okay, so just to review those things, develop good templates for your proposal and SOQs, use informal email proposals, use ballpark prices to test for realistic expectations in your potential clients. If you think somebody's kicking tires or price shopping, charge for the initial consultation and the formal proposal prep, and prepare formal proposals as close to contract execution as possible. That's what they call in programming late binding. You're going to bind a variable to its value as late in the game as you can. That preserves maximum flexibility, and in this case, reduces your costs, overall business development costs. We're going to take a quick break, hear from our sponsor, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about how do you demonstrate expertise to potential clients. That's important for consulting businesses. So if you're not giving away a bunch of free consulting advice, which I've told you not to do, and you're not giving away a bunch of free proposals, the question is, well, then, if you're telling me to do that, how do I demonstrate to the client that I know what I'm talking about? I'm going to give you a few different ways you can do that I think is more effective than giving away free advice or free proposals. I'll share a little rule of thumb with you. We'll get to that right after we hear from our sponsor. Would you like to manage your land surveying or civil engineering data in a GIS? Do you work for a small organization or utility company? Have people told you that there isn't a way to get started with GIS for your data unless you have a $3 million budget and a dedicated ArcGIS server in your basement? That just isn't true. You can get started with GIS for a few $1,000s using QGIS and the expert consulting advice from the team at Redefine Horizons. We've been using open source software like QGIS to manage land surveying and civil engineering data for over 20 years. Call us to see just how easy it is to start. We can help you do an initial GIS needs assessment for your organization and introduce you to QGIS on the desktop for no charge. You can find our team on the web at www.rh-survey.com. I appreciate that sponsorship from the team at Redefine Horizons. How do you demonstrate expertise to a potential client if you're not going to give them free consulting advice or a free proposal? You don't need to do that. And that's what I thought when I started the business. But you don't. You don't need to give away proposals to build trust and demonstrate experience. In fact, a good client isn't going to expect that. If you've got a potential client that is demanding free consulting advice or a ton of work on a free proposal, you don't have a good client, you have a vampire. And so you need to learn the difference between those two things. But it is still important to demonstrate your expertise. And it's more important for a professional consulting business than it is for a lot of other types of businesses. If you're selling, you run an lemonade stand, if you're selling to consumers, it's much more important for a professional consulting company, because what people are paying for is good professional advice, hopefully from a professional that they can trust. In this case, a land surveyor, hopefully that they can trust, that's going to give them good advice. So you do want to demonstrate expertise. It's a really important part of your branding and your marketing, but you don't do that by giving away a bunch of free advice. There's an asterisk there. I'm going to clarify that in a minute. You don't do that by giving specific clients, potential clients, free advice and free proposals. So there are better ways. What are the better ways to demonstrate expertise to potential clients? I've got three ways. The first one is the easiest, and all surveyors should do this that own their own businesses. And the first way you demonstrate expertise is with your website. We talked before in one of the first episodes in this series on finding good clients. Your website is the most powerful marketing tool you have. It provides the highest return on investment. So demonstrate expertise on your website. How do you do that? You talk about the types of services you offer, how that helps clients solve problems. You can show past projects. You can show testimonials from past clients. There's a number of different things you can do on your website to demonstrate to a potential client that you're legit, right? Like you're the real deal. You're a land surveyor who's qualified, experienced, trustworthy. You know how to give them the type of advice that they need. You can do that through your website. So that's the easiest way and the most important. When I say easy, I'm not saying any of that's easy. It takes time and money, but it's achievable, relatively achievable. The other two things are a little tougher for a lot of land surveyors, but I do think they're important. And the other is you can do research and write articles. Those articles can go on your website. They can get published in other, they could get published on other websites. They could get published in your professional association magazine. So research and write. Sorry, there's a so. Research and write, I think that's important. It's a great way to demonstrate your expertise. I tell people all the time, you don't have to be you don't have to be Hemingway or Shakespeare. Be a decent writer, work to be a decent writer. There's not a lot of coverage on surveying and mapping topics. So there's a great opportunity there for even, so writers to make an impact. So and we need more of it. We need, I write a lot. I write a lot for our surveying association magazine, and I write a lot on LinkedIn, and I write for my own website and for our business. I wish more surveyors generated that kind of content. I think it's important. One of the reasons why we don't always get the respect that we deserve and we don't get paid fairly is because people don't understand what we do. And part of the reason they don't understand what we do is because we don't write about it. So research and write articles. Start a podcast or a YouTube channel. I have both. And don't get overwhelmed by that. I know it can seem overwhelming. One video a week. You'd be amazed at what 1 5 or 10 minute video a week on a YouTube channel can do for your business. And it's a great way to demonstrate expertise to your clients. I know I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but a lot of times when I get a call from a potential client that I've never met, they already feel like they know me. They call me and they act like they've known me for years, because to some extent they have gotten to know me. They've listened to our YouTube videos. They've checked out the podcast. They've been on our website and read some of the stuff I've written. And they feel like they have a certain level of familiarity with me. That is super powerful. That is a great way to draw in the best kind of client. Now, look, if you've got a potential client, all they care about is cheapest price, you $200 less than the guy down the street. They don't care about that familiarity. But if you have someone who's looking for a consultant they can trust, which is the best kind of client, then that familiarity is really important. It makes me think about a client we have. He's a good client. He's a good guy. He's a good client. He's a local landowner. We're helping him with the subdivision. And he was super nervous when he came in. He's spending some of his retirement nest egg to get through this development process. It's not guaranteed. There's some risk there. And he met with my former partner, Danny, and I. He met with us, I don't know, 3 times, 4 times, talked with us. He was just trying to get familiar with us, feel us out. Like he was trying to establish some level of trust there. And I think you can do that with these other things I've mentioned. Your website, right while you're writing, and with your, having a podcast or having a YouTube channel. So I think that's important. Okay, so I told you guys I was going to give you a rule of thumb, and I want to do that now. So I keep telling you, don't give free advice, don't give free advice, don't give free advice, don't give away your advice for free, don't give away your consulting services for free. That's true. Here's the asterisk, though. Sorry, I just bumped the mic. Here's the rule of thumb I use. People, when they call here or email here to RH, general advice is free. Specific advice is not free. Typically. Now, if you're a good client, existing client, and you call here, I will give you specific advice. But if I've never met you before and you call here, that's my rule of thumb. If you want general advice, I can give that to you. Specific advice, I'm gonna ask you to get under contract with me. So let me give an example of what I'm talking about. Here's the kind of question I would answer if somebody called or emailed me. When do I need to get a boundary survey? I'm going to do a subdivision in I would like to subdivide my commercial property in California. What is that process like? I want to build a shopping center. Somebody told me I need to map utilities and that I need a civil engineer. Is that true? Those are fairly general questions. I don't mind answering those. And what I try and do, I have a 45-minute to an hour commute each way. I try and schedule those calls for when I'm on my commute because that's some dead time. I mean, I listen to podcasts and audiobooks and stuff, but it's dead time. It's not highly productive time. And so I don't mind having conversations. A lot of times I'll talk to people on those calls. Okay, those are general. Here's the type of question that I don't answer. This is specific. That I don't answer for free. I'm buying the vacant lot at the corner of Jacktone Road and Highway 4. What do I need to put a gas station and a mini mart on that parcel? That's way too specific. If you really want answers to that question, you need to put me under contract. I need to go look at the zoning. I need to go look at the land development regs. I need to look at the site. At least on satellite viewer. You need to pull a flood zone map. There's all kinds of things I got to do there to give you a good answer to that question. So if you want an answer you can rely on to a specific question, you have to get me under contract. Let me try and give you another example. I'm buying a commercial building at 3232 Calaveras River Boulevard in Stockton. My real estate broker told me I'm going to need to have flood insurance. I looked at the FEMA website and I don't think my building's in the floodplain. Do I need flood insurance on this building? Way too specific. Way too specific. Right? Like, now if somebody calls and says, hey, I'm buying a building. I was told it's in a flood zone. What does that mean? I'll answer. That's fairly general. I'll answer that. If you want to know about a specific building on a specific parcel in a specific flood zone, you got to pay me for that advice. So that's my rule of thumb. General advice is free, typically. Specific advice is not free. Now, here's a fantastic thing about having a good website or a good YouTube channel, which we've talked about. Oftentimes, when I get a general question that I feel like I can answer with free advice, and that typically will come by email, I just send people to the specific video or article on the YouTube channel or article on the webpage that answers their question. It takes 30 seconds. It's prepared, well thought out content. I'm not shooting from the hip. It's a great way to do that. So that's a huge advantage of those other ways to demonstrate expertise that we talked about. There's very rarely do I get a specific question that I can't point somebody to an existing learning resource of ours for the answer. When I do get a general question that we don't have a video or an article to answer, that we can use to answer the question, I make a note of that, and we get a video or an article that answers that question, right? That's a gap in our content that I need to try and fill. So apologize. That's my rule of thumb. General advice is free. Specific advice is not free. Now, I call it a rule of thumb because I'm not saying I wouldn't ever give specific advice to somebody that wasn't a client yet. And I'm not saying that I will always give general advice for free. And if you catch me on a really busy week, I may just not have time to just answer all your questions about a boundary survey. And if I'm trying to think of an example where I might give some specific advice. I've got a couple good land attorneys I work with. I've worked with them for years and years. If they called me and said, "Hey, we've got a client. They've got a question about a parcel. We probably don't need a proposal from you yet, but we'd like to just run it by. Can they send you an email or call you up real quick, and can you take a quick look at the parcel with them and let them know what you think?" I would do that. In that case, I might look at some things specifically for somebody that's not yet a client because I've got a referral from a good client. So it's a rule of thumb. Okay, the last thing I wanted to talk about in this section on demonstrating expertise is I want to encourage you to be like attorneys. Now, there's a lot of horrible things about attorneys, but there's a lot of good things about attorneys too. And I think surveyors should imitate attorneys more often in a number of different ways. Maybe I'll do PYBO2 extra on that. But I'm going to talk about one way that you should imitate attorneys. And if you work with attorneys enough, you will know this. Now, I work with attorneys professionally, and also now because I'm getting older, I've had, I don't know if you want to call it the opportunity. I don't know if it's an opportunity, but I have worked with attorneys in my personal life. I had some family members that died, and we had to get some help from some attorneys to take care of some of that kind of stuff. And what you'll find when you interact with attorneys on a regular basis, like I do, is they have something they say a lot to potential clients. And I'm going to quote it. Here's what they say. "I'm limited in the advice I can give you without a signed legal retainer agreement for liability reasons." I'm going to read that quote to you again. This is what the attorney tells a potential client fairly early on in their interaction. "I'm limited in the advice I can give you without a signed legal retainer agreement for liability reasons." Burn that into your brain. Repeat it 10 times. Here's why attorneys do that. There's 2 reasons they do that. One is they have a very real danger, and I think this is more dangerous for attorneys than it is for surveyors, but they have a very real danger that a potential client could argue that they gave legal advice that could be relied upon even if they don't have a contract. So there is a real danger there for attorneys from a liability perspective. The other reason they do it is because they don't want to give away a bunch of free legal advice. And attorneys have it even worse than surveyors. People are always trying to pump attorneys for free legal advice. So that's why they do it. That's why they say that. We should be like attorneys. We give what people really are paying for us, hopefully, is professional consulting advice and services, not work products. That means you need to act like an attorney. You need to tell potential clients, "I can't give you specific advice about this transaction or about this parcel or about this development project or about this infrastructure project until I have a signed agreement for liability reasons." I tell potential clients that, several times a year. It's a really effective way to filter leads and determine if people are serious about paying you for your expertise. All right, so just to review the section we just talked about, you don't got to give away consulting advice, specific consulting advice, or free proposals to demonstrate expertise. You can use your website. You can research and write articles. You can start a podcast or a YouTube channel. My rule of thumb for advice: general advice is free. Specific advice is not free. Remember, be like an attorney. Tell people you can't give specific advice until you have a signed agreement for liability reasons. We're going to take a break. Hear one more time from our sponsor. When we come back, we're going to talk about how you can avoid the mistakes I made first couple years I was running RH when it comes to qualifying leads and proposals. we've talked about some of that, but we'll rehash one or two things, and I have some new things, some suggestions I can give you about how to avoid my mistakes, and then we'll wrap up, talk briefly about analytics. Google Earth is a great tool. It is the software that brought the power of geospatial data to the masses. A lot of land surveyors use Google Earth to manage their data. However, your organization can quickly outgrow Google Earth for survey data management. Is there a better way? Yes, you can use QGIS and open source desktop GIS to manage your organization's land surveying and civil engineering data. The team at Redefine Horizons can help you do that. They've got decades of experience managing land surveying and civil engineering data using open source GIS tools. The best part is this doesn't need to cost $1 million. It is very easy and inexpensive for your organization to get started with QGIS. As a bonus, QGIS can import and export the KML files used in Google Earth. That means you can still use Google Earth when it makes sense. Check out Redefine Horizons on the web at www.rh-survey.com and let us know how we can help get you started with QGIS. There's no charge for your initial consultation. We're going to wrap up this episode now that we heard from our sponsor. We're going to talk about how you can avoid the mistakes I made when it comes to qualifying leads and preparing proposals. First couple years I was running RH, and we'll talk a little bit about analytics just a couple minutes at the end of the episode. So how can you avoid the mistakes I made? Remember we talked about 2 mistakes. That was in the first part, the last episode. The 2 mistakes were I gave away too much free consulting advice, and I prepared too many free proposals. So how do you avoid those mistakes? The most important thing I think you can do as a small business owner is understand and utilize the power of the word no. That's hard. We worry about not having enough work. As business owners, we tend to be too optimistic. That's why we're entrepreneurs. Nobody in their right mind would start a small survey business. So we're overconfident and overly optimistic. We tend to look at the world with rose-colored glasses. You have to learn to say no. You have to learn to say no to providing free advice. You have to learn to say no to preparing free proposals. You have to learn to say no to getting in a bidding war with other surveyors. You have to learn to say no to projects that are a bad fit. You have to learn to say no to clients that are a bad fit. You have to learn to say no to work that isn't profitable. I am amazed at how hard that is I see other surveyors struggle with it. I don't want to say that I don't struggle with it. It is easier for me, I think, than for other surveyors. I see surveyors take on bad jobs for bad clients for not enough money all the time, and we're going to do an episode on why surveyors work for starvation wages, and I understand what some of the reasons are, but it's foolish. It doesn't make any sense. Don't do it. Say no. I've come to realize the last 5 years, the most important thing I can do as a business owner is say no. It's not say yes. It's say no. No, I don't want your project. No, I don't want to work for you. No, I am not going to help you for free. You write no in a big Sharpie permanent marker on your forehead and look at it every day in the mirror. And when people say, why do you have the word no Sharpied on your forehead? You say, because I'm a land surveyor and I give away too much free advice and I give away free proposals and I take work for bad clients and I take work that isn't profitable and I have to learn to say no. It's that important. So understand and utilize the power of no. Create a proposal blacklist. We have one. You're an institutional landowner or real estate broker or public agency in Central California and you waste our time on a proposal, you get on a blacklist. And the next time you call, you don't get a free proposal from us. Have a blacklist. Remember who those people are. We have a small office in South Lake Tahoe, and there was a small public agency in the Tahoe area that put out an SOQ And we were excited to get some work in the Tahoe area, and we've got an office right there in South Lake. So I broke my rule, and we prepared an SOQ, even though we didn't know anybody at the agency. And basically, the agency just is going through the motions. They've got a local company that they like using, which is okay. But they're just going through the motions when they put out the RFQ it's like every 2 years they put out the RFQ. And I broke my rule, and we wasted a bunch of time putting together an SOQ, and there was no chance we were ever going to get selected by that agency. And to make matters worse, they never even responded. So we sent, the deadline for the decision passed. We called them 3 or 4 times, emailed them 2 or 3 times. They wouldn't even acknowledge that they got our SOQ, and they wouldn't tell us that we weren't selected. I will never, ever, ever work for that agency, ever. Like at some point, the old crotchety surveyor they're using in South Lake is going to kick the bucket, and they're going to need a new surveyor, and it's not going to be us, even though I'm right there in South Lake. Because they couldn't extend us the professional courtesy of even a response. Now, I don't blame them. By the way, I don't know the surveyor that's working for them is old and crotchety. I just assume that, because most surveyors are old and crotchety. I don't blame them. It's not their fault. You know whose fault that is? It's my fault. I prepared an SOQ for somebody that was just going through the motions and they weren't looking to develop a new relationship. That's my fault. I won't do it again. But they're on a blacklist now because I know how they operate. And I think there's a lot of agencies like that are just going through the motions, right, with their RFQs. And on the private side, you get people, they're calling 15 surveyors. Every surveyor, I get people... This happened to me the other day. Somebody called me and said, "Hey, I've got a survey down in Bakersfield. Are you interested?" And I said, I talked a little bit about what they needed. I said, it's too small. Let me refer you to a good surveyor I know down in that area. They'll do a better job. It'll be less expensive because they don't have the 3-hour drive. And you know what the person said? Oh, I already talked to them. They already gave me a price. I was hoping you'd be cheaper. They had called every friggin' land surveyor along Highway 99 in California from Bakersfield to Stockton, looking for somebody that was $200 cheaper. They're on the blacklist. I mean, if that's a real estate broker, I just had an attorney do this to me. He got referred to us by another attorney we've worked with before, and he asked me for a proposal. He didn't tell me he was price shopping. I've got a surveyor for another company that works in our office. We just let him have a desk here so he doesn't have to commute to San Jose. And I found out, he came in and told me, hey, he said, this attorney's asking me for a proposal. This isn't really the kind of work we do. Are you interested? I said, is the guy's name, Jack Black? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, yeah. I talked to him 2 days ago. He told me he was gotten referred. Anyways, I found out through the grapevine that he was, he'd called 15 firms. That's a local land attorney. I'll never give him a proposal again, ever. It goes on the blacklist. Keep a blacklist. We talked about this. If the circumstances are appropriate, charge for an initial consultation. If I can remember, I'll try and do a 5 or 10 minute PYBO team extra about when should you do that? When should you charge for the initial consultation? I can give you some rules of thumb. I didn't get into detail on this, but maybe this might be another PYBO team extra we can do. Sorry, I didn't mean to bump the mic there. But I want you to remember that you need to protect your recipe. So when you develop a scope, especially if you're a specialized company like ours, if you serve a couple market niches, your recipe is important. In other words, the needs discovery and project approach that you craft has value. Don't give that away for free. Here's what potential clients do. They get your recipe. I've had this happen. They get your recipe and they hand it to another surveyor that doesn't have your experience or knowledge of the market niche. And they say, can you follow Landon's recipe for cheaper? And a lot of surveyors will say, yeah, we can. I have actually seen other surveyors copy and paste my scope of services that I've given to a client, potential client, word for word in their proposal. It happens. Do not give that recipe away for free if you can help it. It has value. Make people pay for it. Well, we'll maybe talk a little bit more about what an example of a recipe in surveying and why you shouldn't give it away for free. The other thing you can do to avoid my mistakes is understand where you can go, what market segment you can find the best opportunities in. opportunities that are the type of work you want to do, where you have the ability to make the client happy and make a reasonable profit. So that includes market segments, client types of jobs. We're going to do in a couple episodes, we're going to talk about how you segment a market and work with marketing personas, and we'll talk some more about that. Know what you're good at, know where you can make money. Understand where you can make a profit. I don't do fence surveys. I don't do fence surveys, and I don't build stadiums. That's not my market. That's not where I make money. It's not what we're good at. And then the other thing you can do to avoid mistakes is, learn how to shoot from the hip with ballpark numbers. Try and get comfortable with that. You can eliminate a lot of tire kickers. A lot of people shopping for coupon deals if you toss out some realistic ballpark numbers. And I tell people basically, we won't touch a boundary survey here for. I tell people $10,000. I might do a boundary survey for $7,500. If it's on a map and I think the monuments are there. I don't do anything. It's rare that we do anything for less than $10,000. Now, part of that's because I file records of survey, which is a law here in California, and I try and set monuments. A lot of surveyors don't do that, but I don't do $2,500 boundary surveys, and I never will. We never will do that. We will never do that. So when people call, especially people looking for small boundary survey, just tell them it's $10,000 at a minimum. It's at least $10,000. If they have a heart attack when they hear that number, I know not to waste any more time with them. Okay, to wrap up the episode, what are some analytics you might want to think about to understand if you're being effective with your business development resources, if you're properly qualifying leads, and you're writing proposals for the right opportunities? Track your proposal costs. You can do what we're doing right now at RH, which you just have one bucket where all your proposal costs go. At least that, at a minimum, you should be doing that. In other words, don't let your surveyors bill that to general office, to general overhead. Have a bucket for it so you can at least understand, in a given year, what percentage of your revenue are you spending on business development and proposals. It's not marketing. That's different. Track your hit rates so you can track. And we need to do a better job of this at RH, but of our proposals, formal proposals, how many result in an executed contract? I've got a pretty good feel for that number here, just because I do most of the formal proposals. And like I said, it's above 75%, which is very healthy. So I have a good feel for that. What I don't do as good of a job on is checking our hit rate on those informal email proposals. It would be interesting to know. I know it's going to be way lower, of course, but it'd be interesting to know, is it 1 in 10? Is it 1 in 7? Is it 1 in 5? I don't know. It'd be interesting to know what it was. So that's something we could work on. So you can track your hit rates. This is really important. We talked about this in the opening story of the first episode on this topic. You don't want to just track your hit rate, though. See, if you just track your hit rates, then you get that situation that engineering company had that I worked for, where the lead BD gal was only interested in winning opportunities. She didn't really care if they were the right opportunities. In other words, she didn't care if they were profitable opportunities, and she didn't care about the amount of revenue. All she cared about was ticking the box. I got an opportunity. That's not smart. So you have to track not just your hit rate, but also for a given client or for a given on-call contract, or even for a particular project type. Let's say Alta surveys as an example. What's our revenue? How much gross revenue did we do for Alta surveys in 2023? That's an example. What was our profit margin on that revenue? At some point, when you get big enough, it is helpful to know that, to have that data on all of your major project types and all of your repeat clients. That'll help you make better decisions about where to spend your business development resources. I don't do a fantastic job of that. We don't. We could do better. We will. We're at the point in our growth now where in the next, few years, I'm going to have to start to really think about that, because I'm going to have other people doing proposals. So I don't want to tell you how to design that whole system. Maybe we'll talk about it in a future episode when I'm doing a better job of it myself. But I do think it's important and it's something you should think about. All right, next episode, we're going to talk about how you can hire a diverse team of great people for your small surveying and mapping business or organization. My friend Kyle asked me about that. I think we do a good job of it here at RH, but there's some reasons why it works here that may be somewhat, I don't want to call it unique, but we're special. And so it works really well for us. And I'm a little bit nervous about giving everybody that recipe, because I don't think it's going to work for all firms, all companies, survey companies. But I think it can work for a significant minority. And I think my friend Kyle is running that kind of business, the kind of business where this would work. And it was a great question that he asked me. I think it's really important. I think diversity, when balanced with meritocracy, is really healthy for your surveying business. So we're going to do a whole episode on what is diversity, why is it important in your organization, how can you attract and hire a more diverse group of team members. So I'll enjoy that. He mentioned it to me as a topic, and I got super excited. So we'll do that. That'll be the next episode. I already have it outlined, and I'm gonna try and record it this weekend. So we'll get that up as soon as possible for Kyle and for the rest of you folks. Thank you for listening. As we wrap up the podcast today, I want to do a couple things. I want to let you guys know where you can find the podcast. And I also want to let you know how you can support the podcast if you've enjoyed it. So let's start with that first thing. Where can you find the podcast? The podcast lives on the web at laneandblake.com/PYBOTM. So if you go to my website, laneandblake.com, up at the top, you'll find a menu. Go to Learn. It's the second link in the Learn menu. That'll take you right to the podcast. We have got links to download all the episodes there in MP3 format, and we also have the show notes. You can also find the podcast on YouTube, youtube.com/@PYBOTM. All of the episodes are also uploaded there. We have the podcast on Spotify, so you can find the podcast in all of those places. Second thing, how can you support the podcast? There's a few different ways you can do that. If you'd like to sponsor the podcast, reach out to me with an email, phone call, or text message. We can talk about your job opportunity for senior land surveyors, or if you have a high-quality product or service for land surveyors and mappers, we could also talk about that on the podcast. You can also subscribe to the podcast on YouTube or Spotify. Tell a friend about the podcast. Share one of your favorite episodes on social media for us. And then finally, if you'd like to make a real difference, you can go to the On Point Workshops page at Patreon. We've got a tier there, membership tier for $20 a month. You can join and support the podcast, and you get extras. We call them PYBOTM extras there. So we try and do one or two extras from each episode, video and audio, as just a little thank you to the folks that support us for $20 a month. So if you got the price of a medium pizza in your budget and you want to support the podcast, the best way to do that is on Patreon. That will help me pay for Carly. Carly is the virtual assistant and digital marketing extraordinaire that helps me with all of the unseen back-end work on the podcast. So editing, maintaining the web page, doing the show notes, that kind of stuff. Carly's great. I'd like to keep her around. One way you can help me do that is by becoming a subscriber or a member on Patreon. So appreciate everybody that's done that already, and I also appreciate the thank you notes I've gotten from several of you for the podcast. That makes a difference. I know everybody's busy. I appreciate you guys taking some time out of your busy schedule to send a thank you note. So please support the podcast, and we will catch you guys on the next episode. Thanks.